I never say that I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I am happy to say that I'm a member and attend Beverly Unitarian Church, and I've also been an active member of UU churches in Durham, North Carolina, and Ithaca, New York. I consider myself a religious liberal in the sense of being open to the good parts of many traditions. I could talk more about my background and beliefs, but I gave a COVID-era sermon that's still available on the Beverly YouTube page. Search for me in liberal religion if you want to find it. So I will not try not to repeat that sort of stuff here. The main reason that Marcia and I first joined the UU Church in 1990 had to do with our experience in that particular congregation. That's also true for most people who joined here. They like this congregation. For me, two things were important in making a final decision. One was very important. I was not converting to a religion. I was joining a religious congregation, but not changing my religious identity in any way. Second, freedom of belief. Now, some people are scared by this. Can you believe anything that you want? Well, I did read what's on the back of the order of service here, the statement of principles, and I looked at that, and that seemed like a good piece of commonality, certainly something I could live with. So what does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist? So for some people who don't know this, I'll just say a few things. There's an official organization called the Unitarian Universalist Association, which has bylaws dating back to a merger in the early 1960s, merger of two congregations. If you read the bylaws up to 2 years ago, there were some major changes 2 years ago, last year, there's only one reference to the word Unitarian Universalist referring to a person. And that's a technical clause way down about having to do with the handful of congregations that are affiliated with two different denominations. But basically what was in the bylaws are the notion of Unitarian Universalist congregation. That's what we are. We're a Unitarian Universalist congregation as part of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Last year, the bylaws were amended after a process, which I will say a little bit more about later, but it's key to understand that despite what UUs are known for, it was not really democratic. And we'll get to that in many ways. Now, in the spirit of the principles, okay, one of the phrases early on in the revision is actually almost a preamble. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation by congregation, ... Bylaws are a legal document, and I thought it was important to ask the question, what is the definition of a Unitarian Universalist in this clause? As most of you know, I'm a mathematician, and one of the key traits of mathematicians, also true of lawyers, is that we realize definitions are important. In English language, there are many words with multiple meanings, and and that makes some beauty of it. When you have a serious debate, one must agree on what definition one is using. A standard flawed argumentative trick is to make a point using a word with a particular meaning and then use the word with a different meaning later without acknowledging that one has changed the concept. I call this argument bait and switch, although generally, very often it's done unconsciously. So, Unitarian Universalist. Well, when I asked people in chat rooms what the definition of Unitarian Universalist was, they said it's obvious. And then I asked them to be more specific, and I got different definitions. One possible definition would be a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And that could have been the definition used in the bylaws. And then I would be counted. But many definitely said it includes people who identify themselves as UU, even if they do not belong to a congregation or similar organization. So this gives two definitions. one based on membership, one based on identity. Either one is a possible definition, and they're not the same. And as, let me speak, mathematicians speak, neither necessarily implies the other. A member of a congregation does not necessarily identify as a UU, and a person who's identifying as UU is not necessarily a member of a congregation. Now, this was a shock to other people in the chat room, and it sort of made me stand out as very different. And but you have to realize, when you have a chat room of people in a UU chat room, you have a skewed sample of people who want to discuss UUism. It is not a sample of people in congregations. I tried to explain this. It did not help. The key point that I want to make is that UU congregations are more welcoming, more enriched, and grow if we acknowledge the fact that membership in a congregation does not require identifying as UU. This is especially important as more and more people are trying to define and redefine the UU faith. I actually put Frederick Moore, who I sampled in some of the reading I gave, as one of the inspirations for this transition. Let me go for two other words: religion and faith. Is UU a religion, and is UU a faith? This is a good example of where the answer, at least for some of us, depends on the definition of the terms. I tend to say yes for religion because the word religion comes from something that ties people together, and definitely we're tied by some common beliefs, as well as a community of people with a certain amount of ritual that binds us, as well as a community. Of course, it's the congregation rather than UU that is really the binder, but that's quibbling. Faith is a different question. Sometimes faith in the US is used just to mean a particular religious group, in which case UU is a faith. Those of us in UU congregations are a faith when one's making statistics. I should also say there are tax reasons to do this. But however, my personal faith, whatever that means, comes from a multitude of sources, and actually very little of that comes from UU sources. That actually makes a lot of sense when you realize what fraction of the population is UU. It's so small, it makes sense that it's very small. I recoil when I hear phrases like our UU faith or our UU theology, because I may not agree, or our theology teaches us. I may or may not agree with the sentence that comes afterwards, often I do, but it's not because of some UU faith or UU theology. This may sound negative, but I want to think of it as a positive of liberal religion. The reason to have a liberal religious community is to allow and cherish ideas. In my case, a lot of music, as well as philosophical and theological thought from all areas, not just a very small minority of religion. I only accept the phrase UU theology if it is shorthand for theologies of UUs. I'm very happy with UUs giving their personal theologies and things like that. But I don't like it as but there's meanings of this which is very different. So the original question is whether this is important enough to give a sermon on. Honestly, writing sermons is not something I particularly enjoy. I prefer my contributions to services and religious education being in the form of music and sometimes discussions and context for the music in a teaching way. Many, if not most of you, do not know much about the UUA or the wider Unitarian Universalist communities in the US, nor particularly care. I would have put myself in that category until the last 6 years that have forced me to learn and be part of the conversation. I'm not going to go to all of recent UU history here. I would have to discuss other ways, but a Sunday sermon is not the place. But But with the new bylaws that have made for a religious denomination that I and people like me might never join, we do need to discuss it. So here are a few things. And now it's important. I am talking about the UUA. I am not talking about Beverly Unitarian Church. That's a key fact. The UUA and its publications, including electronic, is a censored outlet that refuses to give people with opposite opinions a place to publish where it can be seen by people in UU congregations all around. This was particularly important in the introduction of the UU values, where the large number of voices against the proposal were not given outlets. This is one of the reasons when I talk about the non-democratic nature of the procedure. There's another organization, the North American Unitarian Association, that has been formed. Most of the members are longtime UUs who do not feel represented in the UUA. The UUA will not discuss this on their web pages. The NAUA, unlike the UUA, has an electronic publication that allows open submissions. And they really do allow open submissions, but there's very much a skew as to who publishes there. So I can't really call it a broad publication either. So the UU world is not big, but now it's been split. Let me summarize my opinion very quickly into the two groups. Most of the people in the power structure, UUA, I would classify as good people that I would be happy to have in a congregation, but I would not feel comfortable or interested if they were the only people with those views. Now let me describe the NAUA. Most of the people in the NAUA are good people that I would be happy to have in a congregation, but I would not feel comfortable or interested if they were the only people with those views. There are phrases in the new bylaws that would have kept me, and maybe more importantly, others. Shouldn't be all about me. I'm worried about others being unwelcoming. Most of you don't know much about it, but the new values have the centering of love. There's no problem with me in the centering of love. It makes us like other religions. As long as we don't think that this is particular to our religion, having a center of love is actually a very good thing. However, there are other things that have been put in. There's been a notion of covenant. Now, I'm not going to go through there's a tradition of covenant in both Unitarian and Universalist traditions, which has to do with what binds congregations other than dogma. So that is a tradition in the U and U. But there's been a move in the last 30 years to change covenant to a much, much broader thing. And to me, it has been primarily harmful. It's speaking languages that people like me would never enter congregations. There are good things about covenant, but no one's told me anything good about covenant that we can have without covenant. If people told me the good things about covenant, they're actually things that we see in this congregation. We see a community. We see people helping each other. We see people committing their time to this congregation. We see all of this. We don't need the word covenant to say this. I also think we need to be open to people. There are some people who are going to be more dedicated to a congregation than others. That's life. That's not necessarily bad. Not everybody is the same. Now, the real killer for me in the new bylaws, there's a clause talking about we will collectively transform ourselves. I tried to explain that collectively transforming is cult-like. That's exactly what it is. The fact that, yes, we are here, and part of what we're going to do here is grow and develop ourselves. But we're not going to do it collectively. We're going to help each other, and we're going to hear, and we're going to learn from each other. But we all have individual paths. I would never have joined a church that had collectively transformed in its bylaws. Are there other people like me looking in? This is going to be scary. I do want to mention one other thing. What got me into looking at the UUA? I had spent a long time ignoring the UUA, basically. I mean, roughly speaking. But I was required to looking into it when I started hearing words coming from UUA that were really both disturbing and harmful to me. Particularly, there was phrases like, and I'll just say, logic and reason has been used as a tool of white supremacy. For me, in the international mathematical community, there are two reactions people would have for that. One is silly, the other is offended. I think there'll be more silly than offended. But thinking of logic and reason as something of the white community is just scary. And it also harms efforts in the mathematical community. One of the key things, important things, to try to get underrepresented groups into STEM professions is teaching at an early age the kind of tools that they're going to need for STEM things. And this is not just math and science, but it's logic, reason, precise thinking, understanding what a definition is. Now, this is not necessarily in grade 1, but as you're going on, these are keys. I mean, I have a strong interest in mathematics education. I don't teach mathematics at a low level. In fact, I can't teach mathematics at a low level, just because of who nature. But I can tell people what will be expected to people when they reach higher up. What do we expect people to know? And we have enough problems with peer pressures in schools of peers saying that math or science is, well, it used to be a white thing, used to be a Jewish thing, now it's an Asian thing. But whichever one you want to use, you can also say it's a male thing. We have to fight the peer pressures of people, and we should be championing logic and reason and things like that for everybody as part of the opportunity. I like to emphasize the word opportunity more than social justice, but there's a lot of intersection between them. Economic opportunity, social justice. This is something very, very key to me. Okay. I promise not to make this entirely, promise Marcia, not to make it entirely a rant about the UUA. If there are people who want to know more, I am happy to discuss it. I would like to end by considering BUC, us. Unlike some other congregations, we still choose to write the principles on the back of the order of service. I would like people to look at them. You have an order of service, you can look at the principles. You don't, yeah, okay. Now suppose we have someone comes in, likes what they see in the service, and also something I haven't mentioned, which is very important, the outreach and social justice parts of the congregation. The fact that I haven't mentioned that does not mean it's not a very key part of the congregation, as they see this. And suppose somebody finds those principles something that they could go along with. Maybe not word for word. You can quibble on word for, but the basic principle of it. Isn't that someone we would want as a possible member, regardless of their religious, political, ethnic, etc. background? Do we care what religious or ethnic identity they identify with? We appreciate them for them, and we actually gain by having people with many different identities. Now look around the room and see who in this room belongs. Look around. I'm hoping the answer was everyone you saw. I'm just going to end this and maybe talk to the UUA and give an invitation. There is a tendency for the UUA to try to teach us. I invite the UUA to come to BUC and learn from us. And I'm going to end with that. And now, please rise as you're willing and able for hymn number 23, Bring Many Names.
Do you want all 6 verses? How many verses, Greg?
4.
4.